Kia ora. Welcome to Conversations with Wahine, brought to you by the Wellington branch of the National Council of Women, New Zealand.
Hi everyone, welcome to today's episode. I'm Ash and I'm joined with Laura. How are you, Laura?
Hello, I'm good, thank you.
Today we are joined by two wonderful women. So Jacqueline Coates has a Masters of Theatre Arts in Directing from Victoria University of Wellington and Toi Whakaari New Zealand Drama School. She has worked as a director, restage manager and assistant director on a number of organisations and has accolades from the New Zealand Fringe, Wellington Theatre Awards and Dunedin Theatre Awards. Nicola is the founder and creative director of Voice Arts, an award-winning charitable trust supporting human development through applied improvisation and devised theatre. She is also an actor, improviser and playwright. Today they're here to speak with us about I Carried This. This play tells the story of New Zealand's frequently underrepresented history of forced adoption, specifically in the post-war era of the 1950s and 60s. It features real-life accounts from women whose babies were stripped prematurely from their lives and the lasting impact this issue has had on the birth mothers. Welcome, both of you. I'm so looking forward to this conversation. How are you?
Good, nice to be here. Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you for having us here.
Before we kind of get into the play itself in detail, how did you first hear about the topic of women getting their children taken away that led to the development of the play?
It's probably two parts to that story. So I'll just start with the personal side for me. So I come from a family that has its roots in the Salvation Army. So both of my grandparents were Salvation Army officers. And like a lot of churches, they had a practice of running maternity wards for unwed mothers. And several years ago I did a solo piece of performance that was connected to that side of my family, and it involved the adoption of a baby girl that my grandparents had organised. And in the researching of that story, so that was also a documentary type piece of theatre, and in researching that piece of theatre, there were a number of characters, and the one that stood out for me was the birth mother and her story of what had happened to her when she was young, and how she had gone through life holding that story. So that was kind of the personal, and then the second part of it is that, as you said, I work for an organisation called Voice Arts, and the group in the community that we work with the most are people in their third age, so people over the age of 65 in their 70s, 80s, 90s, and so we're around a lot of women who lived through that time, and it was in conversations with some of them that this issue came up, and they started to say that happened to me, and because we work with them, and Jackie does work for Voice Arts as well, because we work with these women in their third age, we were hearing a version of the story, certainly that I felt hadn't been heard before. So I think a lot of us are familiar with the story of the young girl who gets pregnant and gets sent off to the farm or somewhere like that, and I think that what we're missing is the story 60 years later, because it's a different story. So if you ask these women now, they will tell you a different story to what they would have told you if you'd asked them 60 years ago when it happened. And it's that passage of time. And because we work with women in this age, it was like, so you're talking about the story like this, but that happened, and what's happened between those times to where you're framing the story like this now. Yeah.
Wow.
So.
And what about you, Jackie? How did you
Well, I really came to it through Nicola, so I have to say. So it was, there was a reading of this play last year, and I came along to the reading along with some people from my voice arts class, so we all came along together, and I was really struck at that point when I went to that reading about the power of hearing the older woman's voice. It's really and the telling of that story and allowing people space to be able to speak about the things that are important to them and in the way that they want to say them. So a lot of work that I do with different community groups, and this includes my work I do with voice arts, is about saying, we want to hear what you have to say and the way that you're going to say it. So, and that's what I really drew me to wanting to be part of this project and to direct this play.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, what was the ultimate reason why you decided to write this play? What audience, I guess, would you like to reach with the play, and what message would you like for them to take away from it?
So I think what drew me to this was that I lots of things coming into my brain, pieces of theatre that centre the voice of older women is rare. And because we work so much in this space, we are aware of how invisible sometimes our older population can be. Right? We shut them away and we look after them physically, but we possibly don't give enough care to their emotional well-being. We recognise their years of wisdom, but we don't give them platforms to share that. And so that felt important to me. And just recognising that when these women come to the ends of their lives, which hopefully is still a really long way away, we lose those stories and we lose those voices. So it's really important to hear from those women now, why we still have them here with us. It felt like a story that hadn't been explored really, and I was just really drawn to how women have this capacity to travel with loss and grief in unique and incredibly powerful ways, and how that changes from decade to decade, and how, where is it with them now in their twilight years, where is it sitting and how is it transformed.
And then I think in terms of audiences, we've got that audience of people who have experienced experiences who were in those times, and then we're also obviously looking at younger audiences too. So younger generations of not just women and men, to be able to know about this history more, maybe hearing these stories for the first time, but realizing actually that they have connections. Quite often, like when I talk about to people I know and say I'm doing this play, and they go, "Oh, that happened to my mother," or "This was, has come through for my generation. This is something that I didn't know about, but actually, now you've said it, it's reminded me of something." So, this is a part of history that is alive, because it's come through mothers and their children and then their grandchildren, so that it continues on. The effects of something that happened at a point of time continue to echo. And by keeping on talking about these stories and as we say, giving life to them, another generation then learns about it, and it doesn't become forgotten, something that's put away and never talked about.
It's that classic thing, isn't it, where if you don't learn about the history, you're doomed to repeat it. And it's just so important that we don't shy away from those difficult conversations, because that's often, as women, it's very easy to have that kind of trauma put away and not talked about, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's there's a thing about, well, it happened and now you don't speak, or you don't feel, or this thing that has occurred to you. It's now we're going to put on a brave face and can just soldier on. So
or that we don't do that anymore, so we don't need to talk about it. But we've learnt from that, and the system's different, and that doesn't happen anymore. But the ripple effects are still in motion for so many people.
That generational trauma.
Yeah, very much so. So
it must have been, I mean, very empowering, but also so difficult hearing those stories firsthand. I mean, on the one hand, such a privilege to be able to hear that from women, but it must have been quite difficult personally to just take them in and take all that on board.
Yeah, I think primarily the privilege. It didn't really feel like, like a gift. And I think for the women who participated in the interviews, for some of them talking in depth really for the first time, and they were just we were both very grateful to each other. It felt like a lot of the time that I was doing the interviews, it felt like a really lovely relationship. Like I was very grateful and felt very privileged to be hearing, and they felt great gratitude that somebody was sitting and just listening and listening and listening for as long as it took and they needed. Yeah, but it was. I mean, it was heavy but also not all the time. There's there's joy and there's light and there's hope and humour. Yeah, and again, because that's the capacity, isn't it, for women to take and have this different perspective to it years later.
I know in Ireland obviously has a huge history with mother and baby homes, particularly around the church, and one thing that's always struck me when you meet anyone who's gone through that is just the strength they have. Just unflappable, like, it was very tough, but we did it and we're here. And it's, on the one hand, it's so admirable, and on the other hand, I think it's just so fair that you had no choice but to go through and hold that and not share that with anyone. I suppose from the conversations, were there any kind of key takeaways that you've really held with you or stood out in the conversations?
I think what's really stood out for me was just how incredibly unique each woman's story is. So they might, they have the similar foundation, but there's so many unique aspects to it. There's not one story that speaks to this part of our history, right? They're all different, and I think that's what we've distilled down in the play is 5 stories that have quite
they're all, and that's what appealed to me about the play as well, and really struck me when I first saw it was that it isn't, there isn't one story, that they all have, they do, they all had babies and the babies were taken, but the how that happened, and then the different reactions from family, and then as they've gone through life, the way that they've each dealt with it, and then the outcomes from whether they get to meet their children or not, and how they feel about that. Where you think you have a kind of picture in your mind where you go, okay, well, if it was me, I would feel like this, but actually we're all different, so we feel differently and for different reasons, and I think that's what makes it true and real and appealing, I think, yes, so that there are, we all experience things in different ways, and we can't expect a story to always be the same.
So there's 5 women's stories in the play, and they are 5 women that you interviewed. Well, they're stories.
So the play takes us. We get to experience and visit and sit through the story of 5 women on stage, or 5 characters, 5 different stories. But I did more interviews than that, quite a few more. But some women were happy to talk for the purposes of their story ending up on stage. Some wanted to talk to support a better understanding and to help with research. Some wanted to talk but only briefly. Some were happy to go in depth. And so what I've done in the writing is sort of distill a range of stories into 5.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think that's sort of the
Yes,
best way.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's
best way
the
to
best way to
describe.
explain it.
And I'm not quite sure if that makes sense, but yes.
Yeah,
So there
no,
were
it
a
does,
range
it
of
does.
women that I interviewed. I think around 20, but on stage you see 5 stories.
But each
5.
of those 5 stories is then told from 3 different points of view. So it's from the younger woman's point of view, so as it's happening, the story as it's occurring, from middle age, so looking back at that story but still having experiences, the ripple effects, and then from what we call the character wise, from the older woman's point of view, who is now looking back on the story at that period of her life. So we get those 3 different perspectives on each of those stories as well, which is makes it really interesting. Yeah.
So the older woman is our now.
Yeah.
As this is now, and then we've got the middle-aged character who often is going through the contact, the reconnection or not, and then the young plays that story that we're all slightly familiar with, but again, just that's the slightly different versions of how that happened for people.
Must have felt such responsibility to just
To
tell
tell,
those stories in a heartfelt and authentic way.
Yeah, and we went through, walked through quite a long consent process with the women whose stories contribute. So, an agreement to begin with that they would be interviewed, and then they were sent a transcript of the interview to check that they were comfortable. Then they were sent the written script so that they could see how their story was being told. And then the main reason we did the performed reading last year was so that they could have the final consent process, which was to see their story on stage. And that felt like a really important path to take, that you can't just get consent at that first bit, and you have to keep getting it through every version.
Because it does change in the way that it is presented. It's different from having an interview with somebody and recording that interview. What we're doing is taking that and turning that into a piece of theatre. So there's already a slightly different lens that you're looking through. So you're not looking at the actual person who has told that story. You're looking at a version of their story. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because they have been dramatised. To work in a theatrical way. So I mean, anyone that's dealt with the media knows how things, you agree to an interview and then things get twisted. So it feels like, now having done the performed reading with them, that we have gotten to the point where we've ticked all the boxes, so it doesn't feel too weighty, because I think we've followed that process. I think now it just feels really, I'm going to use that word again, like a privilege to be able to bring these stories to the stage and have some
and
have some attention.
Those women's stories have now sort of been it's like you've released them, given them, gifted them. So now we're taking them and making them into this other way of telling a story, I guess.
Wow, that's great.
Hopefully that makes sense.
No, it does.
Yeah.
You'll have to come along. And say,
I'm already sold.
Absolutely. So last year the play was read to these people, right?
Yeah,
these
so we did
women.
a performed reading. It was just one night, but it was set up so that the women who had participated could be there. But we brought in a whole lot of other audience. So again, they just didn't feel like that was just them in front of because for some of them they really want to remain anonymous, and so it felt important that we had an audience there, and nobody knew who all sorts of people there. And and it was really lovely. It was, I think we had about 100 people there, and it was an opportunity to test it as well, I suppose, and just see that it stood up and that people were responding to it, and and we did. Jackie responded well because she came on board to direct. So that was sort of the process of allowing them to, not allowing, but creating a space for them to see it properly performed and to feel an audience. Not just to see it. We could have just done a workshop and brought the women in to sit, but just to see it in a theatre with an audience gives them the sense of how it's going to be received.
I guess I'm just curious of what was their response to seeing the play or to have it read. Was it very, impactful for them? Did they like it? Did they not like it?
It was a fairly emotional evening. It really was. I think there were a lot of tears from some of the women, and there was a lot of I think I would like to think, and I think I interpreted a sense from some of them of just feeling like a sense of importance, which they should, and it's about creating spaces where we can endow people and their stories with importance. Because so often stories just don't get that treatment. So it was a mix, and we did a Q&A afterwards. So we had one of the women whose stories is on stage, and she came up and engaged with the audience, and we're going to be doing that again as part of the season. So it was a mix, but it felt impactful. That's a good word. Really emotional, and they had family with them as well, and but in the best kind of way. Like there was no one that stormed out or put their hands up and said, no, this is not what I agreed to. Everyone everyone was really really happy with, and they felt
I think there's that thing you said, there's something about actually having someone make a play about you and your story is a big thing, right? I mean, it's actually that could be quite cool, I think, and then scary and all of those things as well. I think, but as we said right at the beginning of this interview, it's so important to give people that value, and their stories are important. So I think it's great to be able to have that and have had those women be able to sit in the audience, and hopefully they'll come and see this.
I think they definitely will. Because the nature of what they went through. Just going back to your question at some point, you asked about the takeaway, and I talked about the uniqueness, how unique all of these incredible stories are, and yet there is a shared something in there. There is something that all of them experienced, and in some way I think it is around being without a voice, being silenced, being required to hold something to pretend nothing happened, to get on with life, and so to 60 years later to have that then up on stage and with lights and acted by somebody else and really given a weight and a sense of importance and value, it's just it's like they all need that.
And I think it's, as you say, for so many women of that generation, this was a very normal story, unfortunately. So I can imagine now, being older, it almost is like, oh, this isn't important to tell my story. This happened to everyone, but that's why it's so important. So it must have been powerful. And so, Jackie, you got involved following the reading.
I did, yeah.
So what was your involvement from that point, and what kind of personal touch did you bring to it?
Yeah, I think it's so now I've been thinking about how we do this as a stage performance. So with all of the bells and whistles that go along with stage performances, so we lights and music and a set and costumes and all of those things. So so that's what I've been bringing to it, and my kind of thought about it, the way that I've approached it is absolutely with Wise's character as the centre of all the stories, so that it's always coming from her, and she is the one who is telling and ultimately telling these stories, and they're being played out in her mind, but for us as an audience. So there's always trying to play with that sense of memory, and how memory can be stark, but memory can also be fluid. So we've been looking at that in the design quite a lot. The sense of the three different ages of the characters, and how they sit actually in a different time period. So because we've got the 50s, 60s, so the 90s, early 2000s, and then today. So we've tried to how we reflect that, so that gets reflected visually, but also through sound as well. So I'm a really big person for about music and sound. I use that a lot in my work. So I've tried to. We've engaged. We've got a great composer called Matthew Hutton, who has been doing us and making music for us, and but also sound effects about creating atmosphere. So those are the things that I've brought to it.
Amazing.
Yeah, amazing.
And the three women, the three characters of the young and the middle and the wise, they often work as an ensemble. So they're, they are separate, and then they kind of come together as well. There's a lot of it's that Jackie's working really beautifully with that dynamic of these three. They are separate and then they come together, and
so
little ensemble
for the audience. So there's that sense where I really like that as an audience member, because you have to work as an audience member in order to be able to follow, come along for the play of hearing a story, if that makes sense. So the three actors are playing these different characters, and as an audience member you're filling in all those gaps and creating that story in your mind visually as well. So yeah, good fun.
So the events that are represented, of course, they are in the past, in the very past, in the past and the present. But what happened was in the 50s and 60s in New Zealand, right? And at that time it was very common to have closed adoptions. So neither the mother nor the adoptive family knew about each other. Were any of the women that you, Nicola, interviewed or that are in the play able to get in touch with their child after the adoption process?
No. Most the common experience, and again everyone's slightly different, but if I was to generalise for the sake of answering the question, the common experience was that the birth mother had very little ability to connect with the child. It was the child had the right, but only when they turned 18 and only if they wanted to. So birth mothers had very little very little ability and very little rights in that space to reconnect. It was very much led by the child.
And only if they knew they were adopted.
And only if they knew if they were adopted, and only if they possibly had the and often if they had the support of their family, and sometimes they didn't. So,
and I imagine also having information. It's even if you're adopted, if you've no details, it's just a needle in a haystack. Then trying to build that connection. Wow.
Yeah. So no, it was it was incredibly hard for them if they wanted. It was a waiting game, right? It was waiting, years and years and years, and just thinking about, I mean that, again, it's slightly different, but that common theme of you never stop thinking about your child, ever. And it's a daily.
Some of them had, this comes in the stories in the play, those sort of the different, when they gave birth, whether they were allowed to hold the child, not hold the child, see the child, not see the child, breastfeed the child, not breastfeed the child. So it's different. It's different for everyone, and I guess it's depending on, because there were a series of different homes around the country, and what their policy was in their homes. So what the doctors thought, what the nurses thought, and it was very much that, and we try and show this in the play too, that that the women didn't have any choice, any control over those situations, because they were there, and this had happened, and this is the system, and off we go. So all the expectations, or all of those things, and different also with the women's parents about whether they were supportive, not supportive, whether they wanted to know, not know, in different communities as well. And this of course didn't just happen in New Zealand, as you said, it happened in Ireland and a lot of Commonwealth countries, Australia, and there's been quite a lot of recently from Australia about this process and what happened and how the government's dealing with it and those kind of things. So.
Yeah, because I know we've had a lot of different films and plays in Ireland around it, and it's one of those things I always think, it was so long ago, but I know a lot of the women were in Magdalen laundries, and the last one of those closed in the mid-90s.
I know, incredible, right?
And you just think, it's mind-blowing to think about how recent this went on. For the women you interviewed, was there any of their families who weren't aware that they had experienced this and this was kind of the first time they were hearing about it, or was it something they had openly kind of talked about with their families previously?
You mean like the
other children they had? Did they know?
Yeah, no. So again, a real mix of experiences, very different, from husbands that knew to husbands that had no idea, to children that never knew, to children that were raised knowing, my mum had a child before me and others didn't. It was incredibly varied, depending on lots and lots of factors. Incredibly varied.
I know quite a few people in Ireland who have had siblings show up, a couple from America and Australia actually, where they just had no idea, and it is always very interesting how the other children react. Some are very quick to accept and others are very angry about it. It's very complicated, and
incredibly.
It just feels like, I think for other kids that they've had, like, you've had this whole other life and like, do I know you? And it's just such a complicated situation.
And of course you've got, what you gained was more, I'll say more common, what happened with some regularity was that you would have a young couple who came together out of marriage and had a child, and the child was taken away because the couple weren't married, but then they went on and got married and had more children together, and then so they've got full biological siblings, and that there was a good few women who I interviewed who that was their story.
Wow.
Yeah. So that child coming back in and going, you stayed together and you had other children, but you didn't.
Oh, that's tough. And for the children that went through this forced adoption, was it particular classes of families that were more affected? So was it more lower class, more upper class, a mixed bag?
From my small kind of corner of this, mixed. Yeah, right across the board. Yeah.
And were the children given to mixed classes of families, or were they tended to be then adopted by more upper class families?
Good question, and I don't know. I can't.
I guess a lot of them never reconnected.
No,
so,
So no, not sure about that on the statistics on that. Yeah.
Oh,
So I think there were different things in play as well. I was thinking because sometimes it is religious reasons about why you can't have a baby outside of marriage, but there's also the fact about there was no social welfare, no DPB, there was no government support, so that it was very hard for a single woman, if she didn't have the support of her family, to be able to have raised that child. So those kind of and then there's society's expectations, right, as well. So there's all sorts of there are lots of different reasons why people are not able to women are not able to keep their babies. But as you say, you hope things have changed, but I don't know when you hear how about some things and you go maybe.
Yeah, sometimes I'm like, have things changed, or is there just some other hidden secret that we just don't talk about? And probably.
So connecting to what you said about the society expectations, what kind of life did this woman have once they returned from these homes? Were they accepted back in the society? Were they stigmatized? And I guess sometimes family or the society more broadly, they knew about what happened, but sometimes they didn't, probably.
A mix there as well, but I think probably the majority had an experience of either people didn't know because they were sent away, or that was the agreement that we all had. It's like somebody gives you a note that's worth $20 and we just all agree as a society that that's worth $20. It's the same thing, you've all been away and you're going to come back, and we all just agree that we don't talk about that, even though we think we know where you've been. Nobody says anything. That was a really common experience, and so never talked about, never mentioned again. Trying to get on with life as if that had never happened, and just trying to get back into the flow of life, but carrying this enormous amount of trauma that you're never allowed to speak of.
And out of those stories, so some women got married, some didn't. That's right, isn't it? So you can say lots of reasons for that, and so some had more children, and some didn't. So it's all, again, as we said before, it's like there's no one story.
Was there a wide age range of women who went through, like, were they kind of young teenagers, 16, 17, or were they older, mixed
So
bag?
the youngest was that of the woman that I spoke to was 15. And then at the other end there was 26.
I think 26, 27 we said.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, 15 is just...
Well, there's a whole nother story
Could
there.
make a series of plays.
Yeah.
Wow. And so I guess, 50s and 60s, you didn't have that level of sex education. I mean, it's 2024, I'm not sure we still have the best sex education in schools, but a lot of the time these women were left to figure out sex, contraception themselves, and also being judged as immoral if they got pregnant or had sex out of marriage.
Oh, the fault was...
they must have just carried that fault and that failure despite never being told.
Completely on them. It's quite remarkable, just how we kept young women in ignorance, and how that is half the reason why these things happen, because they had no idea.
So
they
literally
had no idea that they had sex. They did not know that they had sex, because they didn't know what it was. So,
it's just, and there's no chance, you
No.
know?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's...
So no, there was and being told, I'm using contraception, or I'm using a condom. Again, they had no idea what that was, what they would look like, what that might feel like. So just believing. Yeah, I mean,
And condoms were only legalised in Ireland in the 80s.
Yeah.
So for a lot of women, in these countries, even if they did know, couldn't get them.
then we're also just starting to get into the contraceptive pill as well. So that's that's fairly new as well in some places, and access, I guess, is also a problem. And then whether your parents are open to that or not, so there's lots of things.
Your doctor as well.
And your
I've
doctor,
heard so many cases of your local GP didn't believe in it, so wouldn't give it to people. Yeah, it's a societal issue, really. Wow. And I guess for the play, can you tell us a little bit about the actors that are in it and how you found them? And
Yes. Well, I luckily Nicola is one of them. So I found her because she was here and she wrote the play. And she did say, to be fair, she did say to me I could cast somebody else, but I thought maybe I should just stick with it. Because she does know the lines really well, so that's really good. We have our Wise character is being played by a wonderful actor called Hilary Norris, who is also who also works in voice arts too, so is very familiar with what we all kind of believe in. But again, it's the thing of having somebody. So Hilary is I'm a 77. There we go.
Sorry, Hilary.
Yes, I think she's okay with us saying it. But they're having actually somebody of the age of they're playing that role. And then our younger woman is Micah Keane. Keel. Yes, sorry. Oh, I'm so sorry, Micah. And she, so she has the role of taking on all of that emotion of the 20-year-olds, the teenagers and the 20-year-olds. So, she's doing a wonderful job. So there's that. Well, I was trying to, in some ways, sort of look like each other. I think Micah and Nicola have a similarity. Maybe not so much Hilary, but tried to have that because they are essentially the same person. So that's one thing that we are looking at in the rehearsal room as well. Is how we make them the same person for each of and a different person for each story. So lots of fun with that too.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So I guess just before we go, where can people watch the play? Are you touring? The dates? I'm dying to see it. I really want to see it.
So we open on the 5th of June here in Wellington at the Hannah Playhouse, which is the old downstage on the corner of Courtney Place and Cambridge Terrace, and we run through to June the 16th. Hannah Playhouse. You can Google there, and they've got the tickets there. Just get them online.
Amazing.
We've got a range of different times, and we've got a couple of matinees, and I understand that we're giving a couple of complimentary tickets on your socials for
yes. So, can I enter the competition?
Couple of lucky people who hear that will be able to come on opening night.
Yeah. Amazing. And if people are affected by kind of anything that comes up in the play, is there places that you recommend they reach out to, or groups or anything?
Yes, we definitely have some information at Hannah Playhouse, but it would be the normal kind of where you would call to help. If you're affected by anything to do with a sexual assault or through anything and issues that have brought up. So those kind of lines there where you can call. So yes, we will definitely have information about that there too. Yeah.
Awesome. I just think I'm so excited to see it, and it's just such an important topic. And as you say, just that privilege of giving these women a voice and a platform. Congratulations, both of you.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for speaking with us.